The President of the United States, on the other hand, showing it exactly the right way it is done, showing American Jews, you have a place here. Do your Shabbat, do your
Yes.
Jewish thing, and that's
Yeah.
part of the American dream.
Something happening in America right now. You can feel it. Even people who don't follow politics closely, even people who never think about theology, can sense it in the air. The language is changing. Suddenly, politicians are talking about God again, national prayer, moral restoration, sacred values, spiritual unity, returning to faith, returning to our foundations. And maybe most interesting of all, almost nobody in power is embarrassed to say it anymore. Now, on the surface, a lot of Americans hear that and think, well, good, maybe we need more morality. Maybe we need less chaos. Fair enough, because honestly, look around. Families collapsing, communities fractured, drug addiction everywhere, suicide rates climbing. People can't even define what a woman is anymore. So naturally, when society starts falling apart, people begin searching for something higher than themselves to hold civilization together. That's normal. Historically, civilizations always do that. But here's the question nobody wants to ask. What happens when government begins merging itself with organized spirituality? What happens when political power starts defining sacred values? And at what point does national unity quietly become religious conformity? Because history tells us that line disappears faster than people think. And right now, whether Americans realize it or not, the groundwork for something much larger is being laid in real time.
The President of the United States, on the other hand, showing it exactly the right way it is done, showing American Jews, you have a place here. Do your Shabbat, do your
Yes.
Jewish thing, and that's part of the American dream.
Trump has officially called for a national Shabbat. If this isn't your sign, I don't know what is. This is going to bring people together. It's going to bring families together. Let's see how many people we can get now to keep Shabbat this Friday. Let's go.
Guys, breaking news. Rafi, have you seen the news?
What news?
So Trump has announced, in honor of the 250th anniversary of America, he's asked everyone to observe a national Shabbat.
What? Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, like in the world that we live in, the fast-paced world where no one has a second to breathe, to just have a minute to stop, take stock of the week past, and think about the week that's going to come. I mean, what's better than that? Phenomenal.
Recently, President Donald Trump signed a proclamation recognizing Jewish Heritage Month and encouraging Americans to participate in what was described as a national Sabbath observance connected to America's 250th anniversary celebration. Now, before we go any further, let's be very clear about something because honesty matters. There is absolutely nothing wrong with honoring the contributions of Jewish Americans. Anti-Semitism is evil. Targeting people because of their ethnicity or faith is wrong and immoral. That's not what this discussion is about. This is about something deeper. Because buried inside this proclamation was language that should make thoughtful people stop and pay attention. Not panic, not scream conspiracy theories, not start predicting dates, but pay attention. The proclamation encouraged Americans of all backgrounds to come together under shared spiritual observance, linked to national identity, national restoration, and national unity. Now, think about that for a second. That kind of language would have sounded politically radioactive 20 years ago, but now it sounds completely normal. Why? Because the culture is shifting, and the shift itself matters.
Reason and Theology Media has this to say. This is a Roman Catholic. Why does a professing Christian wants us all to celebrate the Jewish Sabbath? Dano Shabbat Shalom. Trump is welcome to keep the Sabbath if he would like, though I am not sure how that makes sense from a New Testament paradigm. But calling on Americans to do so is odd, he said. Why doesn't he call on Americans to celebrate the feast of the Annunciation of Eid al-Adha? Why does everything from him have to be Jewish oriented? Occupied nation, he says. Do you think the Catholics are happy? I don't think so. Mr. Gerald Wayne said this: Trump wants all of the Gentiles to observe the Sabbath. A Heritage Month proclamation is supposed to honor a people. This one honors Jewish Americans. Quote George Washington, praise faith, family, freedom, then calls on American to observe a national Sabbath for the 250th year. America has mastered turning unity into a campaign sermon. Here is another thought. Jeremy Unplugged had this to say: incredible. Trump is calling on all Americans, regardless of faith, to observe a national Sabbath from sundown May 15 to nightfall May 16 in honor of the nation 250 year. A president invoking Sabbath for the whole country? Biblical times. Now, some might ask the question, James, isn't that a good thing? You are a 7-day Adventist. You keep the 7-day Sabbath. And Trump is speaking in your favor here, right? You should rejoice. I will say, no, we can't rejoice. Because even though he is speaking about the true biblical 7-day Sabbath, it is not Jewish, it's God's Sabbath, it is still a problem coming from a politician because religious liberty must be protected. You have to understand, as a Bible-believing Christian, we must stand against false worship and forced worship. If it is false, we speak against it because the Bible does not agree with it. If it is forced, even though what is being forced might be true, we have to stand against it because God does not use force. Force is the devil's mechanism. It does not work like that. Now, we can say for certain, this law is not forcing anyone to do anything. It is a urging, an appeal, but it is still coming from a politician. It is still upholding a religious law. Therefore, it lays the foundation for something bigger later on. That's why we have to pay attention. So to the question whether or not we should celebrate, the answer: we should not celebrate. We should respond like A.T. Jones responded to the 1888 message when he stood before Governor Blair. What did he say? Take a listen.
Our Constitution guarantees not tolerance, but rights. And we claim those rights as American citizens.
Mr. Jones, without yielding the point, let me move to another question. How would you react if we were to rewrite this bill as a Saturday law, with Saturday as the Sabbath, not Sunday at all? I suppose you would take a very different position.
To the contrary, Senator, all laws that attempt to force the conscience are manifestly unchristian and unconstitutional by their very nature. Therefore, Senator, we are against every Sunday law that has ever been made since the first one enacted by Constantine to the one you are proposing now. And if you changed it from a Sunday law to a Saturday law, we would oppose it just as firmly.
For decades, the West aggressively moved away from religion. Church attendance collapsed. Traditional morality eroded. Truth became subjective. You have your truth. I have my truth. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is sacred. Nothing is absolute. And for a while, elites celebrated that. But eventually, societies discover something uncomfortable. You cannot hold civilizations together purely through entertainment, consumerism, and self-expression. At some point, people need meaning, shared identity, moral structure, something transcendent. And once a society loses those things, chaos follows. That's exactly where America is now. People are exhausted by division, exhausted by instability, exhausted by cultural insanity. And when societies become unstable, populations become willing to accept solutions they normally would never accept. That's human history, every single time. Fear changes populations, crisis changes populations, instability changes populations. People start saying things like, we need unity, we need shared values, we need to restore morality, we need God back. Now again, none of those statements are automatically evil, but here's where it becomes dangerous. Once society collectively decides spiritual unity is necessary for national survival, freedom of conscience becomes vulnerable. That's the part nobody talks about.
On honoring the Shabbat, which I'm not going to be doing because I'm Christian. So I'd like to already just say no.
Now, this is where things become fascinating, because the Bible predicted a future world where religion, politics, economics, and power would eventually merge together. Not overnight, gradually, through crisis, through fear, through the promise of stability. And suddenly, what once sounded impossible no longer sounds impossible at all. Revelation 13 describes a system where worship and allegiance become central political issues, not just private spirituality, public allegiance, authority, conscience. Who defines truth? Who defines morality? Who determines acceptable worship? Those are not small questions. Those are civilization-defining questions. And honestly, many Christians misunderstand this entirely. They think prophecy is about obsessing over headlines. It's not. Prophecy is about trajectories, patterns, movements, conditioning. A society doesn't wake up one morning demanding enforced religious conformity. No. First, it normalizes religious assumptions, then moral consensus, then collective spirituality. Then eventually, dissent becomes viewed as dangerous to social stability. That's how it always happens. Now, there's another layer to this conversation almost nobody in mainstream media will touch: the Sabbath. Most people today think the Sabbath is exclusively Jewish. Biblically speaking, that's not actually true. According to Genesis, the seventh day was sanctified at creation, long before there was ever a Jewish nation, long before Sinai, long before Israel existed. The Sabbath was presented as something universal, a reminder that humanity is not self-created, that God is creator. And honestly, that message directly collides with modern culture, because modern culture worships autonomy, self-definition, self-creation, the idea that man answers only to himself. But the Sabbath fundamentally declares something different. You are not ultimate. God is. That's why this conversation matters far beyond politics. At its core, this is about authority. Always has been. Now, let me say something that may upset some religious audiences. The greatest danger right now is not secularism alone. It's counterfeit spirituality. Because many people love religious symbolism while having no actual relationship with God. They love moral language, national prayer events, public spirituality, religious identity, but they do not want surrender, obedience, holiness, truth. And that combination becomes extremely dangerous historically, because once religion becomes political infrastructure instead of genuine worship, power inevitably corrupts it. Always. The issue in the final conflict described in Revelation is not merely external observance, it's allegiance. Who owns your conscience? The state? Culture? Political leaders? Religious institutions? Or God alone? That is the real question. Now, to be clear, this does not mean every proclamation fulfills prophecy tomorrow morning. That's foolish. That's sensationalism. And frankly, Christians have embarrassed themselves many times by trying to force every headline into apocalyptic prediction. But dismissing cultural trajectories entirely is equally foolish, because societies are absolutely being conditioned right now. The language is returning. Sacred identity, collective worship, national morality, spiritual unity. That language is becoming mainstream again. And if history teaches us anything, it's this. When societies become fearful enough, they willingly surrender freedoms in exchange for security and cohesion, including religious freedom, especially religious freedom. But honestly, here's the uncomfortable truth most people watching this need to hear. The issue is not just, what is America becoming? The issue is, what are you becoming? Because many people study prophecy obsessively while spiritually drifting from God completely. They know the arguments, they know the symbols, they know the timelines, but they do not know Christ. And that's a serious problem. Because according to Scripture, the final crisis ultimately reveals loyalty, not merely information, not intellectual superiority, loyalty, faithfulness, real worship. That's why Isaiah describes the Sabbath as a delight, not a burden, not merely a doctrine, a delight, a relationship, communion with the Creator. And if faith becomes merely political identity, people will not stand when pressure actually arrives. History proves that too. So yes, pay attention. Pay attention to the signs. Pay attention to the cultural shifts. Pay attention to the merging of political power, moral language, and religious identity. But don't become consumed by fear, because the purpose of prophecy is not panic, it's preparation. The point is faithfulness. The point is truth. The point is remaining loyal to God in a world increasingly desperate for control, conformity, and manufactured unity. And maybe that's where we are headed. Maybe the world really is changing faster than most people understand. The real question is whether people will have the courage to remain faithful when the cost of doing so becomes very real. And honestly, that moment may arrive sooner than many think.